Hi everyone. We're just waiting for Miss Dillard to join us. Hi Miss Dillard, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. We were just having some technical difficulty.
I totally understand.
So I'm trying to see who else wants to be in this thing. And then we can start. So this is a very a small project. This is a very small account. We are we did send out the invite a day in advance. So hopefully more people could join us.
Oh, yeah.
Um, okay, let me see. Oops. Trying to. I'm just waiting for my other two friends and Michelle to join me. I'm not sure if she's actually able to join us.
Okay. Is there a way to invite me from my page, or this is the only way?
I think I believe you will have to go. You have to you have to request to join from your page if you want to go in there.
Okay.
Yeah, because I
Okay.
saw you
I'm
that
ready.
you joined me through there, so that was the reason why I requested you to join me
Yeah.
through there.
Yeah. Okay. Let me.
Yeah, you can log into your other account. There we go. I'm trying. Oh, here we go. No, not there. I'm trying, Marina. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. There we are.
All right. Great.
There we are. So how are you doing today?
I am well. Thank you. I am well. Thank you for the invitation to have this conversation.
Thank you for joining us. I guess my classes are having a little bit of trouble trying to join. I was trying to see if I can invite some more classmates, but I don't see anybody else. I mean, I do see one, but she can join at the same time as you for some weird reason. Hold on. You can hear me? Oh, Beth? It says we can hear you. You
Yeah,
can or you can't?
I think she can.
Hold on. Let me see if I can. There you go. Let me take this out. Okay. Yeah, this is the only thing about going live. There's always going to be so much technical difficulties. Now you
Mm-hmm.
can hear me? Oh, okay. Hello, everybody else who's joining us. And so we're going to wait a couple of minutes until more people can join us, and then we can start the conversation. Um, okay. Okay, so we're going to open. So we're going to open the floor, and my name is Alexandra. I'm a first year graduate student for the MSW program at Montclair State University. And we have invited a very special person to talk to us. Basically, this is a very small project that we have been doing during the semester in which we're trying to bring to light the the, the injustices and that, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement happening, we were trying to put a little bit of grain in terms of the history and everything that is happening to our brothers and sisters in the Black community. So we invited Ms. Diller, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I know you have a very well knowledge on the mental health in the Black community, and I don't want to speak too much. I want you to tell our viewers, who are you and what do you do, and how we can actually help out in this movement, in the sense of how we can help out each other, especially with COVID-19 and all those injustices that we're seeing every day. How as a therapist, as a counselor, or as just even as an everyday citizen, we can help out to our brothers and sisters.
Okay, Alexandra, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be a part of this platform. Who am I? That's a pretty deep question, but I won't spend all my time on that. I just will tell you a little bit about myself, my work. I am an immigrant, first of all, to the United States. I migrated here almost 4 years ago from Jamaica. And I'm a mom, I'm a wife, a grandma, and I'm also, for work, I'm identified as a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm licensed in the states of Georgia and Minnesota, and I serve my clients in both states, primarily now via telehealth due to COVID-19. I'm educational training consultant, parent coach, and mother-daughter healer. I do teen therapy. Teens are my primary focus, and yeah, those are just some of the things about me. I don't know that they say who I am, but we'll figure that out as we go along.
We understand that the statistics in terms of mental health disorders in the Black community in general are high now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's actually affecting more people in the Black community and in the brown and other racial communities across the United States. In your time as a therapist, what have you seen happening within that community?
Yeah, let me just start by saying that mental health issues have plagued the Black community prior to COVID-19, and so even more so now. The thing about it is the fact that one is Black and in America primarily um, is one of those precipitating factors for mental health challenges. Whether or not it is recognized or even acknowledged, that's a different story. But mental health challenges, yeah, it's a big deal in the community by virtue of just racial trauma. And it's compounded and has become more complex by COVID-19, yes, and we are seeing more. Um, we're seeing more cases of anxiety, more cases of depression. We're seeing, a lot of hopelessness because, along with the COVID-19, we're also dealing with the visibility of the racism and racial trauma, and then on top of that, we're also dealing with the issues from a political standpoint and with the pending election and just the blatant what would I call it, dismissal that there is an issue, or dismissal that Black people are being targeted and hunted and treated differently. And it continues to be a civil unrest in the country, yeah, but beyond that, it continues to be that unrest within our bodies, our Black bodies.
What would be a message that you will give to the Black community? And what will be something that you will recommend to practically get the help that they need in times like this?
As far as mental health is concerned, well, I think the message, I mean, I could say what I would encourage people to do, but we also have to go back and we also have to look at stigmas, and we have to look at why it is so challenging for members of the Black community to get mental health care. I mean, there has been so much stigma around mental health care, and or even to define. So I wouldn't necessarily start with the suggestion of what to do. I would start with education. I would start with education, and education by influencers, education by people who can carry the message, right, about what is mental illness and what is mental health, because those are two different things. Mental health includes our emotional, our psychological, and our social well-being, right? And all of those things are being impacted now when you just turn the news on, or the climate and the civil unrest that's going on, the blatant racism that is being perpetuated. It does impact one's mental health, right? So we have to look at that. When we talk about mental health, it affects how we think, how we feel, how we behave, our ability. It helps us determine how we can handle stress, and how the choices that we make. So we have to define those things. right? Um, hey, Dr. Catherine, thank you for joining. We're talking about mental health in the Black community, and I'm glad you popped on. So defining what mental health is, it's just like telling somebody to take care of your spiritual health or your financial health or your physical health, right? You have to also take care of your mental health. And then you have to define also what is mental illness, right? Mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, their feeling, and their mood, right? It may affect someone's ability to relate to others and also to function in everyday living. And when we look at mental illness, we look at some of the causes, which some of those are biological factors, such as your genes, your DNA, which a lot of trauma has been passed down through our DNA, if we want to talk about epigenetics, but we can come back to that. Our brain chemistry, and then, life experiences and the trauma and abuse that we're experiencing, and family history of mental health issues. Those are some of the things that cause mental illness. And so defining those and having people to become more familiar with those terms and looking at the language that we use, because a lot of times we'll just say, oh, he's crazy, or you're acting crazy. And those are, derogatory words. And who wants to go speak out or even admit that I'm crazy, quote unquote crazy? So we have to look at language as well. Again, education. And we also have to look at the mistrust that has been perpetuated in the community and how the Black community has been violated over and over and over. That helps to create that constant mistrust. So if we have a disproportionate number of less or lower Black therapists who are giving care than to the Black community, then trust becomes a factor. So
That was one of the questions I was going to ask in regards to, there has been always this issue that representation in the mental health field in regards to other races, it's very low. And, and I was going to ask how that affects directly to the person who is seeking the services when there is not a person of their race or a person of their culture giving those services to them.
Right. And I don't want to imply that only Black people can offer mental health care to Black people. That's not what I'm saying. But there is an issue of trust. And when we're talking about Black souls connecting, it's there are things that are unspoken in that connection when you walk into the room, the therapeutic room, and you see somebody across the couch or across the Zoom screen now that looks like you. There are unspoken things that happen in that space. And so I think, if you're not able to have that experience or find somebody who looks like you to offer it, let's not just abandon the thought of getting mental health care.
You talk about the stigma associated with mental health and mental illness. You elaborate a little bit about it. But what about the barriers that, sometimes, for example, the lack of health care or the lack of health insurance? There are many health insurance companies that do not cover mental health care in there. So how do we approach to that, or how do we actually, create some change about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Lack of access can be a huge barrier. And the thing about it is, well, let me go back to stigma as well. One of the things that really, and this feeds into the mistrust, is pathologizing our clients as they walk through the door, and not in assigning these diagnoses that we don't know how they're going to impact the client. We're dealing with a group of people that's already marginalized, and a group of people that has denied access to so many areas in society. And then we're going to add another thing on top of that as a diagnosis, which further complicates how they're being viewed or the access that they might have, right? When we're working with people who have denied access to fair housing, fair employment, and different things like that. And now we're going to say, okay, this person is also coming to you with a mental health, with mental illness, or this diagnosis. I think that also plays a role in the trust or the mistrust. Do I have to get a diagnosis? And if I do, and that's the question that many of my clients ask, and if I do, how will it impact me? And how will the insurance companies use this? If I have a clinical diagnosis of, let's say, depression, right, with psychosis, is that going to mean that 5 years down the road I won't be eligible for life insurance? Or is it going to skyrocket my insurance rate? You know, how does that further create a barrier to some of just the basic things in life? So those are real questions and real consequences.
Do you think we have made an advance? Because we talk about stigma, and the reason I keep coming back to it is because, you know, mental health, no matter what group we're talking about, it's still stigmatized, and even within our own, even within our own community, even inside our own community. Do you think it has kind of changed in the past few years? Do you think they were still not there when it comes to the stigmatizing mental health within our own community?
I think the stigma is still there. I think there has been more improvement because, for example, we're seeing, I'm seeing more African American men seeking out therapy, which, you know, at one point that was almost unheard of, and more people are seeking therapy. And I think one of the things that helps to drive that is as more people speak out and bring awareness and just admit to the fact that more influencers, right, admit to the fact that I'm struggling, I'm having mental health issues, and people identifying with that person and saying, okay, well, if so-and-so is having a mental health challenge and they're seeking help, well, maybe it's not so bad, right? I wish it didn't have to be predicated on an influencer admitting, but just on the need, or somebody examining themselves and saying, I can't function, and so I need to get some help, right? And I think as we make it more, as we're talking about it more, and the more we have these conversations, and the more we normalize getting mental health care, I think that more and more people will move in that direction.
We have a question in our comments. It says, since the pandemic started, have you seen an increase in cases?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really at the point where I'm full now. There has been, because a lot of people, you know, with the loss of so many things, loss of jobs, loss of choices, loss of lives, loss of traditional celebrations, a loss of so much compounded with the visibility of murders and directly uh, being perpetuated against Black men and Black women, and also being sheltered in place with people who may not have the skills to deal with their own stress and their own in conflict. And so we're seeing a rise in domestic abuse as well. And that, rubbed up against childhood trauma and all those different things that's happening, and sometimes even the hopelessness that we see in the media. It becomes really compounded, and our bodies are really not built to contain all the stress that people are enduring now. And so, yes, since the pandemic, I've seen a significant increase in cases.
Can we talk about coping techniques with that type of anxiety in regards to the pandemic?
Yeah, coping is is really important, and we have to really pay attention to what's going on to our bodies, to what we're putting in our bodies, what we're putting in our minds, and we have to guard ourselves. And so some of the things that I recommend is like mindfulness practices. That's really important. Mindfulness, which basically means paying attention. So taking the opportunity to slow things down and paying attention to say, okay, what's happening here? What's happening for me? How am I feeling? And taking the time to breathe. And it might seem like breathing, it sounds so simple, but inevitably, every time I lead my clients through a breathing activity, they always feel better. Because when we are under stress, when we are afraid, and all those things are going on in our bodies, the first thing we do is hold our breath. And so if we just practice deep breathing, basically, and some people call it box breathing or tactical breathing or diaphragmatic breathing, where you inhale, but not skip the process of holding. You have to also hold it. And then you breathe out and relax and do a cycle of that. Just starting there can be helpful. Because when our bodies are triggered, when we are afraid, when we are restless, when we're anxious, our minds, our brains take us right to the place of survival. So we go into the fight, flight, or freeze mode, and all kinds of stress hormones are released in our body, or is released in our body. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. And if we can breathe, that can help us to somewhat get somewhat regulated. So that's one big one that I always recommend. Other coping, to unplug. Unplug. Too much of anything is never good. So unplug from negativity, unplug from negative people, unplug from social media. Go on a social media diet or fast or whatever you want to call it. And some people say, well, I want to keep up, but it's too much. It's too much. Your brains aren't made, or your bodies aren't made to sustain that constantly getting fed those things. And unplug your children as well, because you'll see that they respond differently and they act differently. Giving yourself grace and self-compassion, that's really important, because we are going through something that we've never, for most people who are alive, has never gone through these kinds of circumstances before. But giving yourself grace and some flexibility, that you don't have to be rigid. While having a schedule and having a plan is good, you don't have to be so rigid. You can impose some flexibility in your life. creating a space of calm where your brain can get a space to relax and to just be off for a while, because it's always going. And also looking at addressing negative thinking, because sometimes when we're anxious, our brains go into a place where we have all these, they call them in the clinical world, cognitive distortions, where you're going through different things that's not true, but your brain is telling you that it's true. And so being able to slow down and address them and ask yourself, what evidence do I have that this is true? And really face those thoughts and those questions is really, really much better than trying to shove them down or try to act like they're not there. And another thing that's really simple, and I think it's very helpful, is to face these challenges with gratitude, right? And somehow when you're using gratitude, it helps to release some of those happy chemicals in your brain that then helps you to feel a little better. So those are just some basic things. Oh, and exercise. However, you can get some exercise, if it's 5 push-ups, if it's some wall sits, if it's just walking around the neighborhood, but getting some movement, some exercise is really, really critical.
We have another question, and it's bringing us a little bit back to, it says, is it possible to speak more about the systemic barriers that the Black community confronts and its lifelong impact?
Its lifelong impact as it relates to mental health.
Yes.
I think as it relates to mental health, we're always I don't know if we're trying to catch up or what we're trying to do, but the systemic barriers are very critical. But the thing about it is some people have the privilege of not even looking at those systemic barriers. There's nothing in the DSM, which is the book that we use to guide our diagnosis. There's nothing in there that talks about racism. And racism by far in America has one of, or probably the most impact on the mental health condition of the Black community. And so just to be able to blatantly avoid that and eliminate that from our main text that we use, that's a privilege that somebody else holds. And so it appears that if you can avoid even acknowledging that this is an issue, then you don't have to pay attention to it. You don't have to treat it, right? And so those, in that sense, there continues to be those systemic barriers.
When it comes to women, we talk about women of color, Black women. We not only dealing with racism, we also dealing with other intersectionality and how it affects their mental health. What are your thoughts about that?
Wow, it's so ironic that you would bring up about women. And just this week, I was reading information from CNN News that reported that in September alone, over 617,000 women in September alone have left the workforce. 617,000 women in September alone. And when I look at the number of men, I think they reported like 78,000 men have left the workforce. And so, immediately it makes me think about those barriers that already exist for women, regardless of who you are, just being a woman. And I think about if these, and I'm not saying that you have to work outside of the home to be powerful or feel liberated or anything like that. I'm saying that it's a significant number of women who are not going to have those privileges anymore. And what has that done to the women's right? What will it do to the women's right movement and even access and in so many different areas? And rightfully, how will that impact domestic abuse? Right. And so those are just some of the questions that I don't really have any answer for. But I think we need to, talk about them.
Yeah. Just to see if there's any more questions in regards to, but in this time of uncertainty, because that's where we're living, we can't avoid the fact that mental health is going to be an issue in the long run. It's going to be a long-term effect for so many people. What do you think as future social workers, one of them, we should be preparing for, we should be acknowledging more, like getting knowledge of more of in order to help our people of color, especially African Americans or the Black community?
Yeah, it's something because we're talking about the pandemic is going to be, when the pandemic is over, But even in the children who are not born yet, we're going to see a fallout from what we're going through now, right? Because there's this research when we talk about epigenetics, passing down of trauma through your DNA, right? There was this research that was done with women who were pregnant during Hurricane Katrina in their last trimester of pregnancy, and it shows that they had a higher increase of cortisol that was passed on to their fetus. And when they follow those children to the first grade in kindergarten, 5-6 years later, those children were at a higher level of children who were diagnosed with ADHD and other mental health challenges. And so I'm thinking about all the people who now are going through this pandemic and the impact of the different things, the lack of being able to grieve in a traditional way, right? Lots of losses, but they can't bring any closure to those losses of jobs, parents trying to juggle working at home and homeschooling at the same time. All these different things that's going on. And then you compound it again with, the lack of access and the barriers. And then you compound it with the barrage of negative ads about the political campaign and all these things that really keep you in a state of hypervigilance, right? Hypervigilance to the point where your body is all in your mind, always scanning for danger everywhere you go. Mothers especially, I'm thinking about Black mothers, worried about will my child come home. That's a privilege or an assumption that we can't assume that when our children, our spouses leave, that they'll come back home. And so all of these things compounded and trying to figure out how to manage it. We haven't even begun to see the impact of that yet. And so I think we have to really prepare and really brace ourselves for our mental health crisis.
So we have a few more minutes. We have like 2 more minutes before we're ending this live. Any final thoughts? And
I think
I
that
know,
as mental health workers, especially mental health workers of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color in that space, I think we have a responsibility really to first take care of ourselves, because the demand on us is going to be great. It continues to be great. And also find spaces where we can consider to be safe, where we can have these conversations without worry of managing whiteness or white fragility, but we can create and be in spaces where we can find some rest and some peace, and amongst people who can identify with us. I think that's going to be critical, because again, the work is going to continue to be great, and also, and I'm thinking about parents. You know, if you are feeling the impact of these things, let's not overlook what your children might be feeling, and they might not have the words for it. So it's not just adults who are going through this, but pay attention to the most vulnerable, or one of the most vulnerable segments of humanity. And that's our children.
what would you say to our teens? Because I know you work a lot with teens, and I'm pretty sure at this point you have heard their point of view as to what's happening in this moment in the world. What would you be your final thoughts or suggestions to our teen population?
Yeah, for our teens, I would say reach out for help. Keep talking. Talk, create spaces where you can have these conversations. Find caring adults to have these conversations with, right? And get a toolbox full of coping mechanisms, because in spite of everything that's going on, we still have to have hope, and don't try not to turn to what we call maladaptive coping mechanism that will further complicate things. And when I talk about maladaptive, I'm talking about things that's not productive, that's not healthy, like maybe drugs or gambling, just anything to get a high or to avoid or to distract yourself. Find constructive ways to work through this. Find a mental health therapist. Get somebody who is responsible in their views to help you navigate it. Don't try to do it alone. Don't try to isolate. We all need each other.
Thank you, Miss Ann, for joining us today. It was a very real conversation about something that we tend to avoid to speak aloud. And I think it's now more than ever needed to bring that awareness to the stigmatized mental health and mental illness all around, not just everywhere in the world, but also in people of color community, especially in the Black community. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and I hope this is not the last time that we meet. Hopefully we can have more conversations about this in the near future.
Absolutely, Alexandra. Thank you, and thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you, and feel free to, if you're watching this and you want to reach out, feel free to message me, inbox me, or connect with me on Facebook or Instagram, or my website is www.anndillard.com. And for more information and resources, you can also find me on YouTube at anndillard.lmft.
Thank you. And to everyone who joined us, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have learned, as I did, a little bit more about this topic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.